April 8th, 1945. Dawn breaks across the East China Sea with the kind of silence that precedes revelation. Beneath the surface, 300 feet down, where sunlight dies and pressure crushes the unprepared, the USS Tirante glides through liquid darkness. Inside her steel belly, the air tastes of diesel fuel, human sweat, and recycled breath. 66 men breathe as one organism, their movements synchronized by months of training and weeks of hunting. Commander George Street stands at the periscope, his eye pressed to the rubber cushion, watching the gray shapes of dawn materialize into something the Imperial Japanese Navy would soon wish had remained a nightmare. They called her a fleet submarine, but to the men who hunted her, the Tirante would become something else entirely, a ghost, a phantom, an impossible presence that violated every assumption the Japanese high command held about American submarine warfare. By the time the sun set 4 days later, she would rewrite the tactical manual on submarine combat and leave 5 Japanese destroyers resting on the ocean floor. The Japanese couldn't process what happened. Their own naval officers, reviewing the engagement reports, would initially classify them as errors, impossibilities, lies told by frightened crews. Even the American Navy, receiving Street's patrol report weeks later, would read it twice, then 3 times, struggling to accept that one submarine had accomplished what should have required an entire wolf pack. But before we understand the impossible, we must understand what the Japanese expected from this war beneath the waves. By April 1945, the Imperial Japanese Navy had been fighting American submarines for nearly 4 years. They had developed protocols, countermeasures, and a confident understanding of how these engagements unfolded. American submarines were formidable, yes, but predictable. They attacked merchant convoys. They positioned themselves along known shipping lanes. They fired torpedoes from distance, then dove deep and ran. They were dangerous the way a sniper is dangerous. Lethal when unseen, but fundamentally cautious, fundamentally afraid of direct confrontation with warships designed to kill them. Japanese destroyer crews trained extensively in anti-submarine warfare. Their vessels carried depth charges, sonar equipment, and speed enough to run down any submerged contact. The doctrine was clear. If a submarine revealed itself, you hunted it to death. The destroyer always won these engagements because the destroyer controlled the surface, controlled the speed, controlled the initiative. A submarine that lingered was a submarine that died. This wasn't theory. This was experience purchased with American boats that had stayed too long, pushed too hard, and now rested in the dark trenches of the Pacific alongside their crews. Commander George Street knew this history. Every submarine commander knew it. The USS Wahoo had been sunk in 1943. The Tang, one of the war's most successful submarines, had gone down in October 1944, victim of her own malfunctioning torpedo. The Albacore, the Growler, the Corvina, the list of lost boats grew longer each month. Submarine warfare was mathematics written in blood. Calculate the angle, fire the torpedo, run deep, run silent, survive. Never engage multiple warships, never surface in hostile waters, never, under any circumstances, charge directly at a destroyer. Street understood these rules. Then he decided they didn't apply. The Tirante had departed Pearl Harbor on March 3, 1945, her 3rd war patrol. She carried 24 torpedoes, standard load. Her crew was experienced but not exceptional, skilled but not superhuman. What they possessed instead was a commander who saw the ocean differently. Street had studied every patrol report available, absorbed every lesson from every lost boat. He understood that the Japanese expected American submarines to behave a certain way, and he understood that expectations were tactical vulnerabilities waiting to be exploited. On April 8th, as dawn illuminated the East China Sea, Street's periscope watch spotted them, a convoy of 3 cargo vessels escorted by 2 destroyers. Standard formation, standard procedure. The destroyers positioned themselves as shields, forcing any attacking submarine to expose itself to counterattack. It was a formation designed by experience, refined by necessity. It should have been impenetrable. Street studied the formation for 17 minutes. His executive officer stood beside him, waiting. The control room crew watched their instruments, hands ready. In a standard engagement, this was the moment you calculated the safest torpedo solution, fired from maximum effective range, then dove and ran. The destroyers would respond, would search, would drop depth charges. But you'd be gone, slipping away into the vastness of the ocean, trading certainty for survival. Street ordered battle stations. Then he did something the destroyer captains never anticipated. He attacked them. Not the cargo ships, not the vulnerable, slow-moving merchants that submarines hunted like wolves culling a herd. He targeted the destroyers themselves. The Tirante fired 6 torpedoes in rapid succession, 3 at each warship. At this range, with these angles, the mathematics were brutal and exact. The first destroyer, the Natsushio-class escort, never had time to turn. 3 torpedoes struck her port side within 14 seconds of each other. She didn't sink. She exploded. The detonation was so violent that men on the Tirante felt it through 300 feet of water and solid steel hull, a shuddering boom that seemed to come from inside their own chests. The second destroyer tried to run. Her captain, watching his companion vessel disintegrate, made the tactically sound decision to increase speed and maneuver. But Street had anticipated this. The Tirante's remaining torpedoes caught her, amidships, as she turned. She broke in half, bow and stern sections rising at angles before sliding beneath the surface in less than 4 minutes. The cargo ships scattered. Street let them go. He wasn't hunting merchants today. For the Japanese Navy, receiving reports of this engagement, the initial response was disbelief. A submarine had sunk 2 destroyers in a direct engagement? Impossible. Submarines didn't do this. The reports had to be exaggerated, misidentified, perhaps the result of mines or aerial attack, misattributed to submarine action. Destroyer captains didn't lose to submarines in stand-up fights. It violated the fundamental equation of naval warfare. Street didn't care about their disbelief. He was hunting. April 9th, 28 hours later, the Tirante had repositioned herself along a different shipping route, this time closer to the Korean coast where Japanese vessels hugged the shoreline seeking protection from the killing grounds of open water. Intelligence suggested destroyer patrols in the area. Street took the Tirante shallow, riding at periscope depth in waters so restricted that standard submarine doctrine classified them as suicidal. At 14:30 hours, they found what they were looking for, a single destroyer on patrol, zigzagging according to anti-submarine protocols. Her captain was doing everything correctly. He varied his speed, changed heading at irregular intervals, kept his sonar active. He made himself difficult to target, difficult to predict. It should have been enough. Street tracked him for 2 hours, not attacking, simply observing. He was learning this captain's rhythm, the subtle patterns that even randomized movement eventually reveals. Humans create patterns. It's neurological, unavoidable. We think we're being random, but we're actually cycling through variations on themes, returning to comfortable choices, building invisible structures even in chaos. At 16:27 hours, Street found the pattern. The destroyer's zigzag brought her broadside for exactly 42 seconds every third turn. It wasn't much, but it was enough. 3 torpedoes. The destroyer captain probably never understood what happened, One moment his vessel was executing standard evasive maneuvers in restricted waters where submarines couldn't effectively operate. The next moment his ship was dying beneath him, 3 massive holes torn through her hull below the waterline. She sank in 8 minutes, taking most of her crew with her. The survivors, those few dozen men who made it into the water, would later report that they never saw the submarine, never detected her approach, never had any warning that death was tracking them through mathematics and patience. 3 destroyers in 36 hours. The Imperial Japanese Navy began paying attention. April 11th. Street took the Tirante north into the approaches to Quelpart Island, a strategic position where Japanese naval traffic concentrated. This wasn't opportunistic, hunting anymore. This was Street deliberately positioning himself in waters where Japanese destroyers operated with support, with air cover, with every tactical advantage. He was challenging them in their own territory. The crew understood what this meant. Submarine operations depended on space, room to maneuver, depth to dive, distance to run. Restricted waters eliminated these advantages. If a Japanese patrol found them here, escape became exponentially more difficult. Several crew members later admitted they thought their captain had become obsessed, had crossed the line from aggressive to suicidal. They found 2 destroyers operating together, a hunter-killer pair specifically configured for anti-submarine warfare. These weren't convoy escorts. These were submarine hunters with experienced crews, enhanced sonar, and the tactical doctrine to pursue contacts until they achieved kills. They were probably hunting the Tirante, responding to the impossible reports of a submarine that killed destroyers. Street watched them hunt for him. He let them search, let them ping their active sonar across empty water, let them waste time and fuel pursuing a ghost that stayed just beyond their detection envelope. He was learning their search patterns, their coordination, their communication rhythms. And then, when he understood how they hunted, he showed them what prey looked like from the other direction. The attack came at twilight, that liminal hour when surface vessels lose visual acuity but submarines gain advantage. The Tirante actually surfaced less than 4,000 yards from the nearest destroyer. On the surface, a submarine's diesel engines gave her speed, gave her maneuverability that submerged electric motors couldn't match. It was wildly dangerous. It was tactically insane. It was exactly what no Japanese destroyer captain expected. Street fired 4 torpedoes on the surface, then dove the boat in a crash dive that pushed every system to its limits. The torpedoes ran hot and true. The first destroyer took 2 hits and capsized within 6 minutes. The second destroyer, realizing what was happening, turned toward the Tirante's last known position at flank speed, her crew preparing depth charges, her captain finally understanding that he wasn't hunting a cautious American submarine. He was fighting something that refused to follow the script. But the Tirante was already gone, diving deep, gliding beneath a thermal layer that bent sonar waves away like light through water. Street took her down to 400 feet, past her rated test depth, into pressures that made her hull groan and her crew pray. Above them, they heard the destroyer circling, searching, her sonar pinging uselessly against water conditions that made her blind. The Japanese captain made the fatal mistake of assuming the submarine would run. He positioned himself between the Tirante's last known position and open water, blocking what he believed was the escape route. Street let him believe it. Then he brought the Tirante up slowly, carefully, rising directly beneath the destroyer like a ghost ascending from hell. At 300 feet, Street fired his last 2 torpedoes almost straight up. The geometry was nightmarish, the firing solution something they didn't teach in submarine school. But at this range, with this angle, the mathematics became simple. The torpedoes traveled upward through 300 feet of water in 18 seconds and struck the destroyer's keel. The one part of the hull no armor protected because no one armored against attacks from directly below. The destroyer broke apart. Not sank, broke. Her keel shattered. Her structural integrity collapsed, and she folded in the middle like a book closing. She was gone in less than 2 minutes. 5 destroyers, 4 days. When Commander Street returned the Tirante to Pearl Harbor on May 5, 1945, his patrol report sat on Admiral Lockwood's desk like a piece of fiction. Lockwood, commander of submarine forces in the Pacific, had read thousands of patrol reports. He knew what submarines could do, knew their limitations, knew the boundaries of possible. This report violated those boundaries. He called Street in personally, not to congratulate him, but to verify, to understand, to ask the question that everyone in the submarine service was asking, how? Street's answer was simple. I stopped fighting the way they expected me to fight. The Japanese had developed their anti-submarine doctrine based on what American submarines had done before. They'd built an entire defensive system around assumptions of submarine behavior. Street understood that those assumptions were a cage, and the cage locked from the inside. The Japanese weren't just fighting American submarines. They were fighting their own expectations. Street simply showed them what happened when the enemy refused to cooperate with your mental model of the war. But there was something else, something deeper, that Japanese survivors of these engagements reported when interrogated after the war. They described a submarine that seemed to have unlimited torpedoes, that attacked with a confidence that suggested infinite resources, infinite backup, infinite certainty of survival. One survivor said the American submarine fought like it was invincible, like it knew death couldn't touch it. This wasn't true, of course. The Tirante carried 24 torpedoes, standard load. She was as vulnerable to depth charges as any other submarine. Her hull could be crushed by pressure or torn by explosives, just like every other steel tube that dared the depths. But Street fought as if these limitations didn't exist. And in fighting that way, he made them irrelevant. This was the real impossibility the Japanese couldn't process. It wasn't the tactics. It wasn't the technology. It was the mindset. American submarine commanders operated with a confidence born from industrial certainty. If the Tirante expended all her torpedoes, Pearl Harbor would build more. If she sustained damage, shipyards would repair her. If she was lost, other submarines would continue the mission. The American submarine force fought with the knowledge that behind them stood factories, shipyards, training facilities, and an economic system capable of replacing any loss and absorbing any defeat. The Japanese destroyer crews fought knowing that every ship lost was irreplaceable. Every experienced sailor who died was a gap that couldn't be filled. Every torpedo expended was one less in a dwindling inventory. They fought carefully because they had to. Street fought boldly because he could. Commander George Street received the Medal of Honor for this patrol. The citation specifically mentioned his extraordinary heroism and inspiring leadership. But the real citation, the one that submarine commanders studied for the rest of the war, was in the tactics themselves. Street had proven that aggressive action, properly executed, was actually safer than cautious standard procedure. He'd shown that the best defense against a destroyer wasn't running. It was killing it first. The Tirante completed 5 war patrols. She survived the war. So did Commander Street. So did almost all of her crew. The 5 destroyers rest at the bottom of the East China Sea, their exact positions still unknown, their crews still entombed in steel coffins that will never surface. 66 men in a steel tube beneath the ocean killed 5 warships designed specifically to kill submarines. The Japanese called it impossible. The American Navy called it extraordinary. Commander Street called it mathematics. The cold calculation of angles, speeds, depths, and one intangible variable that the Japanese could never match. The absolute confidence that comes from knowing that behind you stands a nation with the will and the resources to win, no matter the cost, no matter the time, no matter the sacrifice. The sea keeps its secrets, but sometimes those secrets surface in documents and reports and citations for medals. The Tirante was never called a phantom by official designation. But in the records of the Imperial Japanese Navy, in the reports filed by surviving destroyer captains, in the nightmares of Japanese sailors who survived encounters with her, she became exactly that, a ghost ship that violated every rule, every expectation, every comfortable assumption about how this war beneath the waves was supposed to work. Freedom, it turns out, fights with different mathematics than tyranny. One fights with caution born from scarcity. The other fights with boldness born from abundance. And in those 4 days in April 1945, the difference between those equations was measured in 5 destroyers sinking into darkness, their crews never understanding what philosophy had killed them as surely as the torpedoes that tore through their hulls.